Today, we're joined by James Burton III, a powerhouse trombonist and dedicated educator who shaped the jazz scene both on and off the stage. A former pre med student turned Juilliard faculty member, James's journey took a sharp turn at the age of 14 when he first heard John Coltrane's Blue Train. That's a moment that set him on a lifelong path in jazz. He's worked with icons like Jackie McLean, Christian McBride, and Ron Carter, performed some of the world's biggest stages, and now helps mentor the next generation of jazz musicians at Juilliard. Beyond the music, he's full of surprises. He was recruited to play Division I football, has a soft spot for bad 80s pop, and once threw his trombone line off mid-performance at Dizzy's Club Coca-Cola. So let's get into his journey. So James, thanks for taking the time today. Good to see you.
Likewise, I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah. It was funny when we were going over your intro before we started recording, when I read the thing about Dizzy's, I couldn't help but laugh when you're reading that thing out loud.
Yeah, that a moment like that comes for almost every trombonist, at least once in their career.
Yeah. So that's the first time, and hopefully it was the last time something like that happened.
Yeah, it hasn't happened since.
Yeah. You know, you know, James, I really would love to talk to you about Juilliard. Everyone, knows that Juilliard is on the highest level when it comes to, getting your music education, that, you set the parameter based on the best of the best. And as far as it, it goes for you and your personal outlook, should trombonists, when if someone is serious about trombone, should that be their first choice in terms of music school, you think?
Well, one thing that my mentor Jackie McLean used to say is he used to say it can't all happen in New York. And while New York is a beacon for jazz education, we are so fortunate in this day and age to have a wonderful training grounds in different cities around the world. Juilliard, of course, is magnificent because of its relationship with Jazz and Lincoln Center. And if you think about who the students would have access to via the Lincoln Center band, that trombone section, I mean, Elliot Mason, Vincent Gardner, and Chris Crenshaw, they're phenomenal. So let's just start there. And then I also believe that Jason Jackson teaches trombone there right now. I mean, it's an abundance, it's an embarrassment of riches. So yeah, they wouldn't go wrong, with having that as their first choice.
And that's the thing about trombone, that it's something I always think about. There aren't as many trombonists as there are saxophonists, in a sense. So what is it about the trombone for you personally? Like when you think about how come there aren't as many, even in the history of the music, is that the instrument is just more intimidating to play, something like that? Is it just, something they're not exposed to growing up? Because it's, if someone can do it well, it's a beautiful instrument. Someone like yourself can play, the instrument, the same way you would think about a piano player or something. So why do you think it is we just don't see as many in the music?
Well, first of all, thank you. You're very kind for saying that. I think it's a number of reasons. I got a great compliment from a woman once after a gig. She said, I didn't like the trombone until now.
That's it. That's the
Um,
best you can get.
and that's what we aim for. I think so. It's first of all, it's a daunting instrument. It's kind of fretless, like like a violin, viola, like a string instrument. And so actually kind of knowing where everything is from an intonation standpoint is, it takes some doing. But I think the other reason why it's a little bit low key is because it's just a more subtle instrument. It's very similar to the male voice, like a baritone or a tenor voice. And I just think right now in society, we live in a culture where things are so high pitched and so loud. The vibration, the frequency is so, it's up here. And so it really takes kind of a certain openness to tune in to a subtle voice like the trombone. Even rhythm sections I play with, it kind of takes a minute for them to be like, okay, all right, this is what we're doing.
Who was your favorite trombonist growing up, as far as, checking out music and stuff? Who was someone for you that you really just, that set you on the path when hearing that musician, you were aiming for that level of musicality?
If I'm being totally honest, well, first it was, when I heard the Blue Chain recording, it was Curtis Fuller's
Right.
sound.
Hmm.
Immediate, just something, the immediacy of it, the humanity in it just kind of made me want to be a jazz musician. I said, this is what I want to do. I want to do exactly this. But if I'm kind of unpacking my whole childhood and kind of like really looking back, I gotta say, when I was a little kid, like 3 years old, there was an HBO special in the early '80s that featured Earth, Wind, and Fire,
Oh, okay.
and it was something about like the bright outfits and like the full brass section that that really grabbed me. Of course, Maurice White is killing, and Philip Bailey, and the whole, lead vocalist and the band. But I did notice as a kid the brass instruments.
That's what spoke to you.
Yeah.
You mentioned Curtis Fuller before. Do you know the Art Blakey, the live record when they play one by one, where it's like the intro is like Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
That's
Yes.
Curtis Fuller, right? On that.
Yeah. Yeah.
He plays this the most lyrical solo, and just I could see why you would say that, like, just totally. I mean, not to say that the other person who soloed before him wasn't as good, but the way he played, it was what the music needed exactly in that moment, just the way he played. That's my personal experience with when I started to love his music in particular. So I was just wondering if that recording was one that you was inspiring for you.
Absolutely. And another great trombonist, Steve Davis, who was my teacher and mentor when I was going to Hart. We always joke that Curtis is like a magician, and he's our Lester Young.
Right.
It's like there's something so special going on, and it's almost cosmic. You can't really put your finger on what it is. You just have to love it.
Do you hear young trombonists out there like that have come up in the last like 5 years or so who are really doing something unique on the instrument?
I was just having a conversation with Steve Teray yesterday about this. There is a young lady who studied at Michigan State with Michael Deese. She's Japanese. Her name is Nanami Haruta. And I was a judge for the ITF jazz trombone competition last year. And so I listened to the pre screening round, and what a fresh voice. What a fresh voice. It just kind of knocked me out. Like very melodic, very lyrical, very patient, which is not a quality you usually see in this era of trombone student.
If you were to compare her, her to like another instrumentalist, like if you were like who like a trumpeter or something, like who would you say it reminds you of? Just because I don't want to say it reminds me of this trombone,
Yeah,
because that would be like, let's just say trumpet for for conversation's sake.
yeah, I would say maybe like Kenny Dorham.
Oh wow.
You know, yes, it's there's just something very special going on there, and so I'm so excited to see how her career unfolds. I think she has a new album out now.
Uh, I'm gonna make the conversation a little more controversial, if that's okay.
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
In When you see quartets and quintets working, we see saxophone, piano, guitar, and stuff, but it seems like trombone is just, is this something that, it's almost like why aren't they calling more trombonists to play these gigs that are perfectly capable of playing this music and could add their own thing to it? But it's like, does that in some level, like when you like, do you ever think about that? Like, oh, I wish we just saw more trombonists like playing in these various groups, like instead of a saxophone or trumpet or something like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I try not to sound like a grumpy old man
No,
with a
no, I'm
chip
not
on my
saying to
shoulder.
sound grumpy, but I mean, even if it's just like what's going on with that, like in that way, like, or that, or even just saying that's interesting that they don't. But talk a little bit about that. I would love to hear your perspective.
I just think the folks that promote the music, book the music, that book these festivals and book venues, I think are used to seeing certain paradigms. The trumpet saxophone paradigm has been around forever. Bird and Diz, Miles and Train, Miles and Wayne. Like that's an easy sell, you know. And I just think there's kind of a certain paradigm, a certain lens with regards to what musical virtuosity is. It's almost like when Monk was being compared to Bud Powell when he was coming up. Folks thought that Monk didn't have adequate technique, but his technique was phenomenal because technique is just having the ability to do what the music calls for at any point in time, right? And Monk was such an American original. I mean, how can you argue with that?
Yeah, well, also I think too. I was actually talking to Clifton Anderson and we were so kind of talking about the same topic about they're just used to seeing that saxophone, trumpet together up, up on, in the horn section, that sort of thing. But I kind of think I've always thought that if you thought about the different, obviously when you play with like a quartet or a quintet, the different textures that there the possibilities, like once you throw trombone into the mix, like there's so many different textures, like in ways the like where they're playing with just the piano or something, or just playing with the bass or just the bass and drums, like that would almost like give the trombone a new life, so to speak. And I just don't think this is something that is thought about too much. I don't know if I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it's just
That I'm sorry to jump in. That makes perfect sense. And I think the folks that book music now are sleeping on their ability to be taste makers. You know what I mean? Instead of following the curve and trying to be successful doing what's already been proven successful, they have to look at the history of booking. And a lot of acts that have broken through and become really important were so because they were given a chance.
well, I'm trying to I mean, now we're getting down to the real stuff here. I mean, because I personally feel that the jazz scene, there's such a exclusivity component about it as opposed to inclusivity. Like the more musicians we can bring in, the more instrumentalists that we bring in, they don't have to stick to playing the set instruments we see in jazz. Why can't we see more people who want to play, even jazz flute or jazz clarinet or banjo or anything, I just feel like there's just this exclusivity part about it is what's holding the music back. And if people were more inclusive, people wouldn't be as intimidated to be a part of it. So that's one thing I think needs to change overall. Like, but it's just goes parallel with the thing you're saying about being a trombonist, and that's one of the main instruments in the music, you know?
You know, it's I think the devil is in the details. It's all in how you present the instrument. You know, certain instruments have acoustic limitations, but it would just require the right equipment to showcase the instrument properly. You know, like a jazz bassoonist, for example, would just have to be mic'd properly.
Totally. And you hear like I don't know if you ever, I think like even Hal Crook, the educator, I think he might have even been
Fantastic.
doing something with effects, maybe with the trombone at one point, but it's just something. This is just one of these things that people don't know about, that the trombonists out there have to deal with this whole other layer about navigating a career.
Yeah, yeah. And me being a sports guy, I really related to it coming up, going to like five-star basketball camps and kind of running into the folks that were supposed to become basketball stars. And so you get in a situation where it doesn't really matter what happens in the game. They're going to be the ones doing the post game interview and not you, yet undiscovered player who holds somebody to 4 points
Well,
over
maybe
four.
it also could be maybe at the time there just weren't as many trombonists around, doing, while the music was being invented, so to speak. But maybe if there are more now, more will just keep coming, and then that'll make it more prominent. Maybe now is the time.
Yeah, and the just the level, because of this kind of imbalance, the level of virtuosity on the instrument that's been achieved within the last 40 years or so has been unreal. Unreal because of trying to compete with the saxophones and the trumpets of the world.
Do you think that if someone wants to play jazz trombone, it's almost a conversation you have to have with them, like, hey, no, you might have to be doing other things like playing in pit orchestras or, doing more pop gigs. It's almost a conversation that like that need they might hear versus if someone was playing a different instrument.
Yeah, well, it's this kind of what I call the sweetest musical nectar is having a chance to have your voice be heard, kind of unfiltered and reach people. But doing those other kind of gigs, I think adds a richness, to
Sure.
kind of the holistic approach. And I think trombonists, I think all instruments should run to those opportunities because it really opens you up. And that's kind of my thing.
Do
I
you still
love,
have to do gigs like that? Like, if someone calls you to play like a pop gig for like $1,000 or something like that, like do you still get called for these opportunities, or do you want to pursue? Like, I'm just curious.
Oh, I've done it. I've done it in my adult life too.
Oh, don't.
2016 MTV Awards, Rihanna. There I am over her left shoulder, you know, because it's all of their learning experiences. And I work on Broadway. Every night I play the Broadway show Chicago.
I've seen the
And
show.
I've done symphony orchestra gigs of late. I've done salsa gigs of late. I've done brass bands. I think it all kind of filters into your message and your voice.
Yeah. Well, they're probably mad that you're doing all these other gigs. They're, the other, the woodwinds are mad that you get to do all these other gigs, but then like there's like this imbalance, like, oh, well, I wish I could do more jazz gigs. That's so it's like you can't win either way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, do you remember the first time you went to a jazz club in New York and really saw something that was life-changing?
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly what it was. It was the Blue Note Jazz Club, 1996, double bill, J.J. Johnson Quintet and Johnny Griffin Quartet.
Whoa.
Yeah, so they would, I think they split the sets, is what it was. Yeah,
So
and it,
they would do two sets each, or was just like one set and then the other set, like throughout the night? Is that how it worked?
I think there were two big sets, and each one of them did a mini set.
Did you get to go backstage and meet any of them, or you were
I
just
did. I got to meet JJ that night, and it was transformative and also hilarious
well? How come it was funny?
because I was a little young to really, you know the famous story about Miles going up to Dizzy when he first meets him, and he goes, "Why did you play A flat on the bridge of Hot House?" I wasn't mature enough musically to ask a question like that,
Yeah.
so my father, who was like a helicoptering stage dad at the time, just shoved me in JJ's dressing room and was like, my son's a trombonist. Go ahead, ask him a question. And I was just starstruck. I
Yeah.
didn't know what to ask, and so I said, I don't have any questions. I just really enjoy your music, Mr. Johnson. And he looked at my dad and he said, well, this young man seems to have it all figured out. And he and he shut the door,
Oh
and
my
that
God.
was it. And
Yeah, that's wild. Another thing I've been kind of thinking about recently is about the the way things are different in terms of mentorship. There used to be much more like humiliation on the bandstand in this music and very harsh criticism to the point that it could affect someone's mental health. And the times have changed. And that is no longer acceptable just because the way, we're just a more our society is just more aware about mental health. In today's time, like do you still ever see this type of stuff, like that where it's almost too much, like, or you're around all good stuff, or if you did see that, like you're like, oh, this is just not how it's supposed to be?
I don't really see it anymore, but I see kind of other things, which, if you got embarrassed on the stage by an elder, in the 1990s, there's a certain directness to that, which I can appreciate, because for them, even though it's loud and it's brash and embarrassing, it's coming from a point of love. And I'm not pigeonholing all of those situations to being about love. There were definitely some that were not about love,
Right, exactly.
but
I'm talking about those. Yeah.
yeah, that even even that stuff had a certain directness to it, where nowadays I see, because of the political correct environment that we're in, I do see some kind of unsavory things happening because they're like subversive and they're behind the scenes.
What do
And
you mean? What do you mean?
well, where you wouldn't, if someone performed your music not up to your standards, or if it was unsatisfactory, rather than saying to the person on stage or even afterwards, hey, maybe try this and that, or this is what my vision was for this,
Which would be the
then
right
it
way
be
to go about it? Yeah.
the right way to go about it. But then it's almost like this person, oh, they're excommunicated. So then you start to interfere with their opportunities elsewhere because you just feel like they shouldn't be working. I've seen some of that stuff go on, and I don't dig it.
Yeah, that's
You
just like Yeah. I think as musicians, there just needs to be this layer like of understanding, like we're all in this world trying to do this thing, and everyone has their own thing to contribute. Some people are further ahead, some people are a little behind, but we're not robots.
Yeah,
Even the best of the best made mistakes. So
absolutely.
this is just the things that I've been kind of reflecting on. So in terms of what's going on for you, this year, are there things in the near future or the summer or the any other things that you're looking forward to musically that are on the calendar?
Yeah, I am very much looking forward to. Well, next year I'm going to be on the jazz cruise for the first time,
Oh, that's great.
and uh, and it's kind of the definition for this particular cruise has changed. It's Christian McBride's World at Sea.
Mm.
And so it's going to be a week-long window into all of his musical environments, like all of his bands and all of his relationships musically are coming together on the cruise for a week. And so, I mean, I'm excited to play, but I'm more excited to just see all the bands and all the projects, just because he's so great at, I hate to use a term like compartmentalizing, but it's really about being present. He's so great at being present, really present in all the little different bands he's put together.
Yeah, he's special because he's a virtuoso. He's a genius. I'm just going to use the word genius. He's a genius on his instrument, but he's almost, he's the face of the music in many ways. Like just the
Yeah,
cool, and I think so he's in that position to as a genius be able to navigate all these and jump into all these different roles, but him being at that level makes it feel that much better as opposed to someone who doesn't play the music at all, which is I think, a lot of people who are in the term a lot of people who have the power like do not play an instrument. So
yeah,
what say do they have? They don't know what it takes.
exactly. There's something, but you have to really, what do they say? The smell of the crowd, the roar of the grease paint, that thing, you have to really be in it to kind of know. And I think with regards to Christian, a term like genius, I think about it and it almost it even falls short because of anyone who knows and interacts with him knows like the warmth
Yeah, sure.
and
Absolutely.
the authenticity that he exudes. And it's another level, it's another thing, and it's very exciting to be a part of. It's great to be around. It's inspiring.
Yeah, I watched him. He did an interview with Pat Martino. It was a couple hours long, maybe two or three. And it was like this interview was so good. The way he asked him those questions, like, about his life. I'm like, this is like one of the greatest jazz interviews I've ever seen in my life. And the fact that he was doing it, like, I'm like, okay, it makes sense now, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
But it's almost like Carl Reiner, the director, or, who's the director? I don't know. But he said, I'll never ask an actor to do something I can't do personally. And it's like,
yeah,
that same thing
yeah.
almost in jazz, like they can do it themselves. So, definitely. No, James, this has been such a great conversation. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Wonderful.